What the hell do you think you're doing in my children's room at midnight? That was the first thing Silas Harrington ever said to me, billionaire. Cold, untouchable. I stood there in pajamas, one twin sobbing in my arms, the other clinging to my hand like I was the last safe place on earth. They weren't mine. I wasn't even supposed to be there past Tuesday. But from that moment on, I stopped being a maid and started becoming something much more. But before we dive into the full story, let me know, where are you watching from and what time is it? If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and comment on the story you're watching. Your support helps us bring you even more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Because what happened next? It turned that mansion of silence into a home, and it nearly cost me everything. I wasn't even supposed to be there that day. It was one of those cold, gray Tuesdays where the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to drizzle or pour. My shift at the Briarwood Community Center had been canceled last minute, and just as I was deciding whether to go home or stop for cheap coffee, my phone buzzed. Urgent backup, one-day placement, full day rate, Fairfield County, you in? It was Kendra from the agency. Her messages never included fluff, just facts. Yeah. Send me the address, I replied, not thinking twice. I needed the money. My brakes squealed as I pulled into the curved, cobblestone driveway. A black wrought iron gate with gold initials, WHC for Westbridge Harrington Estate, creaked open like something out of a thriller movie. The place looked like it had been carved out of a magazine for people who use the word summer as a verb. All sharp edges, tall windows, and a silence that felt almost deliberate. I parked near the staff entrance and double-checked the address. Yup, this is it, I mumbled, adjusting my headscarf in the rearview mirror. Here goes nothing. When the door opened, I was greeted by a woman in her 60s, thin as a twig, dressed in slate gray. Her face was taut, voice clipped. You must be Tiana Brooks, she said, not asking. We weren't expecting a replacement this quickly. I forced a smile. Nice to meet you. The agency just called me an hour ago. She didn't introduce herself, just turned and started walking. Follow me. The children are upstairs. The previous nanny left. That word left hung in the air like it had teeth. As we walked through the house, the weight of silence pressed down on me. There were no family photos, no toys on the floor, not even fingerprints on the glass banister. Everything was pristine, too pristine. We stopped at the base of a wide staircase. The woman turned to me, eyes sharp behind her glasses. The twins' names are Asher and Atlas, 5 years old. They don't like strangers, don't speak much. They do not respond well to emotion. Emotion, I asked, blinking. Too much of it sets them off, she replied. Keep things formal. Formal for 5-year-olds. Before I could ask another question, I heard it, muffled shouting, something shattering, and a sharp, high-pitched cry. The woman sighed. They're awake, she said flatly, and gestured me up the stairs. I found the boys in a second-floor nursery the size of my entire apartment. The furniture was designer, untouched. A cracked bowl of cereal lay on the floor next to a tiptoe chair, and in the middle of the chaos stood 2 tiny, pale-faced boys. They were mirror images, thick dark hair, freckled cheeks, wide, wary eyes. One was crying, face red and twisted in frustration. The other stood in front of him like a tiny guard dog, arms crossed, mouth tight. As soon as they saw me, both froze. I crouched down, careful to keep my voice steady. Hi, I'm Tiana. I'm just here to help for today. No response. The one in front, the protector, narrowed his eyes. The other sniffled and hid behind him. I didn't move. I didn't speak again. I just sat there, still, letting the silence settle. 5 whole minutes passed before either made a sound. Then the protector spoke, low and fast. Where's Miss Carey? The woman behind me, who I later learned was MS, Langston, the head of household, answered without warmth. Miss Carey left. She said she'd stay. The crying one whimpered. I watched him, saw the way he clung to the other's shirt, and felt something inside me ache. I'm not Miss Carey, I said softly. But I won't leave without saying goodbye, that's a promise. The protector looked at me like he wanted to believe me, but had been disappointed too many times. I spent the rest of the morning trying to piece together their rhythm. What foods they liked, what toys they didn't throw, whether they'd tolerate my humming while folding laundry. Spoiler, they wouldn't. They didn't speak to me again. They didn't look at me either. But they didn't scream, and they didn't cry. And when I started tidying up their room, they didn't run away. That was a start. At noon, I met their father. Or rather, he emerged from his office like a ghost in a Navy 3-piece suit. Silas Harrington, CEO, widower, worth a rumored $800 million. He had eyes like polished ice and a voice you'd expect to hear giving market forecasts on national TV. He didn't greet me. He didn't shake my hand. He just looked past me and asked, "Are the boys fed?" "Yes," I answered, standing up straighter than I had to. He glanced at the staircase. "They're not crying." "No, sir." He studied me then just for a second and then nodded once. "Good, don't overcomplicate things." And just like that, he disappeared into his study and closed the door. I stayed for 8 hours that first day. The twins didn't smile. Sila's didn't speak again. But when I left, I paused in the foyer, turned back, and saw a small face peeking through the banister, watching me. I raised my hand in a little wave. He didn't wave back, but he didn't disappear either. That night, I called my friend Jas from my one-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport. "You're telling me they live in a castle, the dad looks like Bruce Wayne, and the kids act like ghosts?" I laughed, flopping onto my futon. "That's one way to put it. And you're going back." I paused. "They've had 6 nanas in 2 months," I said. "Those kids don't need another person leaving." Jas went quiet. "You sure you're ready to walk into that kind of pain again?" I closed my eyes, thought of the tiny face behind the banister. "I'm not sure of anything," I whispered. "But I think they need someone who doesn't scare easy." By the end of the week, the agency offered me the permanent position. Silas hadn't asked, but he hadn't objected either. And that's how I, Tiana Brooks, daughter of a hairdresser and a janitor raised in a 2-bedroom apartment in Yonkers, became the full-time nanny to the Harrington twins. A job I thought would last a day. That turned into a year. That turned into everything. What I didn't know then was that I hadn't just stepped into a job. I'd stepped into a storm. A storm filled with secrets, guilt, brokenness, and somehow a shot at something like love. But that's a story for tomorrow. My second day should have been my last. No exaggeration. If I had followed logic, or maybe even common sense, I would have walked out of that house and never looked back. But something about those boys, about the silence in that mansion, about the way grief practically leaked from the wallpaper, it kept pulling me in like gravity. It was a little before 7 a.m. when I pulled back into the Harrington estate. The sky was fogged over again, all steel gray and brooding. The kind of morning that makes you want to crawl under a blanket, not walk into a palace full of locked doors and whispered secrets. Magdalena met me at the side entrance again. Her eyes were tired, her posture a little more slumped than yesterday. "They're in the dining room," she said, handing me a cloth napkin with something wet wrapped inside. I unwrapped it, a fork. "Atlas threw it at the butler," she added. "Missed his head by half an inch." I blinked. "Is the butler okay?" Magdalena shrugged. "He's reconsidering his career choices." When I stepped into the dining room, I was greeted by complete chaos. A banana had been smeared across the table like war paint. Cereal floated in a puddle of milk on the floor. And at the center of it all sat Atlas Harrington, shirtless, glaring at me like I'd just insulted his ancestors. Asher sat across from him, hunched over his plate, cutting his toast into perfect little triangles with surgical precision. He didn't look up once. "Morning," I said carefully. Atlas didn't respond, just picked up a spoon and slowly bent it backwards. "You're not the boss of us," he muttered. "I don't plan to be," I said, trying to keep my tone light. He raised one eyebrow. "Then why are you here?" "Good question." "Because someone's gotta make sure you two don't burn the place down," I said with a shrug. That earned me half a smirk from Asher. It was fleeting, but I saw it. Breakfast was a battlefield. Asher refused to eat until I recut his toast because, apparently, one of the triangles was too tall. Atlas refused to sit at the table unless his chair was exactly 3 inches from the edge. He measured it using a toy ruler and glared at me the whole time. Neither of them would speak to me, but they whispered to each other in a language that sounded like English had been spun in a blender with Morse code. It was fast, fragmented, filled with glances and shoulder bumps and little hand signals. I pretended not to notice, but I noticed. Later that morning, I caught them scribbling on the back of the playroom wall with crayons. They didn't hear me come in. I froze when I saw the message. "Don't trust them." 4 words, written in red and green, jagged and angry, right next to a crooked drawing of a stick figure with excess for eyes. Atlas turned when he saw me looking. His whole body tensed. "You're not supposed to be here," he snapped. "I was just looking for the Legos," I lied. He narrowed his eyes. "Did you read it?" I shook my head. "Nope, can't read crayon. I failed crayon 101. Asher let out a sound that might have been a laugh but turned it into a cough. By noon, I needed air. I texted Jas from the garden, me. Today's chaos level, forks equals weapons. Crayons equals warning signs, still no full sentence spoken to me. Jas, girl, this is some horror movie stuff. Blink twice if you're trapped. Me, I think they're scared. Not evil, just scared kids pretending to be scary. Jas, just don't end up on a missing persons podcast. I chuckled, but my chest felt tight. It wasn't just the boys, it was the whole house. Everything about it screamed luxury, but it felt dead. Like someone had put grief on display and sprayed it with lemon-scented polish. That afternoon, I tried something new. Instead of pushing them to play or talk or eat, I just existed. I sat cross-legged on the nursery floor, quietly folding their laundry while they built towers out of blocks. Every now and then, one of them would glance my way, as if trying to figure out what kind of alien I was. I left 2 sticky notes on their nightstands before bedtime. Just short little things. One said, "Today was hard. I saw how strong you are." The other said, "If tomorrow is hard too, that's okay. I'll still be here." I didn't know if they could read well yet, but something told me it wasn't about reading. It was about noticing, about seeing that someone saw them. Silas didn't come down for dinner, again. I passed him in the hallway around 9 p.m. He looked exhausted, still in his suit, tie loosened, phone pressed to his ear. His gaze landed on me for half a second. "Everything under control?" he asked flatly. "Yes," I said. He nodded, then added as he turned away, "Don't try too hard. They don't respond to charity." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the look on his face stopped me cold. It was the look of a man who hadn't just given up, but had decided giving up was safer. On day 5, everything changed. It started with pancakes. Magdalena told me absolutely no variations from the meal schedule, so I made peanut butter pancakes. I made them because I remembered the way Asher had stared at the peanut butter jar in the pantry like it held secrets. I made them because I was tired of rules that did nothing but keep everyone cold. When I served them, Asher just blinked at the plate. "They're not triangles," he whispered. I smiled and pulled out a butter knife. "Let's fix that." We cut them together, slowly, carefully, and for the first time since I walked into that mansion, he looked me in the eye and whispered, "Thank you." Atlas didn't say anything, but he didn't throw his fork. Progress. That night, as I was picking up toy cars from under the bed, I felt something. A tiny hand slipped into mine. "Atlas," he didn't say a word. He just stood there, quiet, breathing fast, holding on like the floor might disappear. I didn't move, didn't speak, just stood with him for what felt like forever. Eventually, he let go and walked back to bed like nothing happened. But I stood there, heart pounding, eyes stinging, because that was the moment I realized this wasn't just a job. This was a war. A quiet war against the ghosts no one in that house had ever named, and I had just been led into the front lines. It started with a nightmare. One so loud, it cracked the silence of that mansion like thunder. I remember jolting awake in the tiny room they'd given me, tucked near the back of the West Wing like an afterthought. I heard it before I was fully conscious. A scream, not just a child's cry, a full-throated, chest-tearing scream that made my blood run cold. I didn't stop to put on slippers. I didn't grab my robe. I just ran barefoot, heart pounding, sprinting down the polished hallways that echoed with Atlas's voice. When I reached the nursery, the door was cracked open, and inside, Atlas was thrashing in his bed, tangled in sheets, his face contorted in pure terror. He was screaming a single word over and over again. "No, no, no, don't, please, no." My soul cracked wide open. "Asher!" He cried out finally, and that's when his twin bolted upright in the next bed, panic already spreading across his face. "Atlas!" Asher gasped. I moved faster than I've ever moved in my life. I was at Atlas's side in seconds. He didn't recognize me at first. His eyes were wild, unfocused, searching for someone who wasn't there. But when I wrapped my arms around him, whispering his name, he let out a choked sob and clung to me like I was the last tree in a storm. He buried his face in my neck and just sobbed, gut-wrenching, broken sobs, the kind no 5-year-old should ever make. "It's okay," I whispered over and over. "You're safe. I've got you. Baby, I'm right here." Asher slid off his bed and came to us, quiet but shaking. He didn't say anything, he just crawled into my lap without asking. I pulled both of them close and rocked gently, my legs folded beneath me on the nursery floor, one twin pressed to each side of my chest like fragile branches trying to hold onto something solid. It was 3:17 a.m., and I broke every protocol the Harrington household had. I stayed the night, right there on the floor, still in my cotton pajama pants and tank top, with my back against the base of Atlas's bed. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't move either. The boys fell asleep in my arms eventually, Atlas twitching from time to time, Asher clinging to my pinky finger like it was the only thing anchoring him to the planet. I hummed an old gospel hymn under my breath. Not because I thought they'd understand the words, but because my mama used to sing it to me when the world got too heavy, and something about it always made the fear smaller. Musical note, there's a light at the river, a light at the shore. Musical note, the floor was cold. My neck was stiff. But for the first time, I felt the invisible barrier around these kids start to melt. They let me in, and once that door opened, there was no going back. At sunrise, I heard a soft knock. The door creaked open, and Silas Harrington stood there, backlit by gold morning light and dressed in another impeccable suit. He didn't speak at first, just stood there watching us. I sat up straighter, trying not to disturb the boys. They were still half asleep, curled against me like lion cubs. I began, suddenly unsure. Atlas had a nightmare. I didn't want to leave them alone like that. Silas didn't move, didn't blink. For a moment, I swore I was about to get fired on the spot. But then he did something unexpected. He softened, just a little. "They've never let anyone touch them before," he said quietly. I blinked. "What?" He stared at the twins like they were some foreign painting he didn't know how to read. "Not since their mother died," he added. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. That morning, I didn't cook breakfast. Magdalena did. But I sat at the table with the boys, still in my same wrinkled clothes from the night before, watching as they peeled their bananas and ate their oatmeal in complete silence. Until Asher looked at me and said, "You were warm." I smiled. "You too." Atlas didn't say anything, but when I reached for his empty bowl, he slid it toward me without the usual glare. I took that as a thank you. Later that day, while they napped, I called Jas on speaker while folding tiny shirts in the laundry room. She picked up immediately. "Tiana, tell me you're out of there. Tell me you packed your bags and ran like your life depended on it." "I stayed the night," I said. "You what?" I told her everything. The nightmare, the floor, the hymn, Silas. By the time I finished, she was quiet. "Okay," she said finally. "I know you're not going to listen to me, so I'm not going to bother yelling, but be careful, T." "I am. No, I mean really, you've got that big soft heart you think nobody sees, but it's written all over your face. These rich people, they will chew you up, smile for the photo op, and spit you out with a lawsuit." "I'm not here for them," I said. "I'm here for the boys." She sighed. "Just don't lose yourself trying to fix people who don't know they're broken." That evening, the twins asked if I could read them a story. Their voices were soft, like they weren't sure I'd say yes. We sat on the nursery rug with a book about dragons. Asher leaned against my arm. Atlas laid his head on a pillow but stayed close enough to touch my leg with his toe. And I read. Every page, every silly voice, every dragon roar. When I got to the end, Atlas looked at me and said, "Can you stay till the sun comes up again?" I swallowed hard. "If you want me to," I whispered. They both nodded. Later, I passed Silas again in the hallway. He looked up from his phone as I walked by. "Miss Brooks," he said. "Yes." His eyes flicked over me for a moment. "Thank you." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. As I turned the corner, I heard him ask, almost to himself, "What are you doing to them?" I paused, but didn't answer, because the real question was, what were they doing to me? No loud voices, no touching the boys in public, no family-style dinners, no emotional entanglements. "That's what MS," Delaney said word for word, as she stood across from me in the main hall like she was quoting the Constitution. Her voice had the warmth of a freezer door. Her silver-gray hair was tied into a bun so tight, I wondered if she even blinked during sleep. She held a clipboard in one hand and a list of things I was never supposed to do in the other. "Anything else I should know?" I asked, crossing my arms without meaning to. She narrowed her eyes. "Yes, Mr. Harrington expects order. This is not a home for sentimentality." I didn't say anything back, not because I agreed, but because I didn't trust myself not to say something that would get me fired on the spot. What kind of father tells a nanny not to love his kids? Turns out, Silas Harrington did. He didn't need to say it. The rules were enough. The silence in the halls was enough. The boys' stiff posture when staff passed them in the corridors was more than enough. This house didn't breathe, it held its breath. And Silas, he was the reason why. The man had the kind of presence that rearranged the energy in a room. Tall, sharply dressed, jawline carved out of granite. When he entered, conversation stopped. People lowered their voices. Even the air seemed to shift to accommodate his silence. He ran his family like he ran his empire, efficiently, coldly. But grief, no matter how well you suit it up, always leaks. The rumors about his wife were everywhere. The tabloids had churned out every theory under the sun: accident, overdose, suicide, foul play. Some said she'd fallen down the grand staircase. Others whispered about pills and a note that never made it to the press. But inside these walls, her name was never spoken. Not once. Even the photos had been scrubbed clean. I checked. Every wall, every room spotless, sanitized, like she'd never lived here, like she'd never even existed. Except in the boys, and in the way Silas avoided eye contact every time Atlas cried. I wasn't here to dig up graves. I was here because two boys were drowning in silence, and silence was never what healed me, so I knew it wouldn't save them either. So I started breaking the rules. Quietly, carefully, one bedtime story at a time. The first one was Where the Wild Things Are. They'd left it out on the nursery bookshelf like a test. I picked it up, sat cross-legged on the rug, and began reading in a soft voice. At first, they pretended not to listen. Atlas built a wall of pillows around himself. Asher fiddled with the edge of his blanket. But 5 pages in, they were leaning closer. By the end, Atlas had moved beside me, resting his chin on my shoulder. The next night, it was Good Night Moon. Then The Velveteen Rabbit. Then a book they made me read 3 times in a row because they liked the way I did the lion voice. And I knew, even before they said a word, that they were letting me in again. Only this time with a little less fear. Of course, rules don't stay broken quietly in a house wired like a pentagon. 3 days after our little reading ritual began, I was called into the West study. MS. Delaney stood by the door like a security guard, arms folded, lips pursed. Silas sat behind a desk the size of my first apartment, flipping through something on his tablet. He didn't look up. "Miss Brooks," he said flatly, "there are surveillance cameras in the children's quarters." That stopped me cold. I'd suspected they were there, tiny domes in the corners of the ceilings, but I assumed they were off or just for show. You know, for insurance, for emergencies. Apparently, they were always on. He tapped his screen once, rotated it toward me, and hit play. There I was on grainy footage, reading corduroy with Asher and Atlas curled up on either side of me like sleepy cats. My hand was resting on Atlas's back. I was humming the last line softly. Silas paused the video before the end. "Care to explain?" he asked. I swallowed. "They asked me to read to them." "You touched them," he said. "They leaned in. You stayed beyond your shift." I wasn't going to leave them mid-story. He stared at me like he was trying to figure out if I was a threat or a fool. "They need consistency, not chaos," he said. "Emotion creates dependency. Dependency leads to disappointment." I couldn't help myself. "Or healing," I said. That earned me a long, cold stare. "Miss Brooks," he said after a beat, "you're here to keep them physically safe, not to play therapist." I looked him right in the eye. "And what happens when the danger isn't physical?" He didn't answer. He just waved his hand. Dismissed. I left that office shaking. Not from fear, from fury. I called Jas the moment I got back to my quarters. He watches the kids from his office like they are inmates. I snapped into the phone. "Like love is a disease." Jas exhaled. "He's scared, T." "Scared of what?" "Hope. Hope hurts when you've buried it before." I sat with that for a minute. Maybe she was right. Maybe hope was what Silas Harrington feared most, because once you let it in, it demands change, and change demands grief. The next night, I still read to the boys. I sat in the same spot, used the same lion voice. Let Atlas fall asleep with his head on my lap, and when I looked up at the ceiling camera, I whispered, "You can fire me if you want, but I'm not stopping." The morning after, I found something on my nightstand, a sticky note, folded in half, no name, just 5 words. "Keep reading, I'm watching." I didn't know if it was a threat or permission, but I tucked it into my pocket like a lifeline and read again that night. It happened just after midnight. The nursery was dark except for the warm amber glow of the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. Rain tapped gently against the windows and the whole house had gone still. Asher had woken up crying. No screaming this time, just soft, heartbreaking whimpers that cracked through the silence like a whisper of pain. I came without thinking, still in my plaid pajama bottoms and an old HBCU hoodie that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and cocoa butter. Asher sat on the edge of his bed, knees pulled to his chest, his tiny face damp. "I had that dream again," he whispered. I sat down beside him. Was it the one with the water? I asked softly. He nodded, then reached for my hand. His fingers were cold and small and trembling. I don't like being alone, he said. Not even when I sleep. I know, baby, I whispered. You're not alone, I'm right here. I pulled the blanket over his lap, rubbed his back the way I'd seen his mother do in an old home video MS. Magdalena once let slip from her phone, just little circles, clockwise, gentle. I was mid-song, halfway through a slow hum of You Are My Sunshine, when the door slammed open. Silas Harrington stood in the doorway like a shadow torn loose from a nightmare. His eyes were wild, jaw clenched. His dress shirt was wrinkled, sleeves rolled up, top button undone. There was something off about him, like a man unraveling under the weight of something too heavy to hold. His voice cracked the room open. What the hell do you think you're doing in my children's room at midnight? Asher jumped and grabbed onto me tighter. I didn't move. Comforting your son, I said calmly. Silas's eyes darted between us. His stare landed on Asher's hand wrapped tightly around mine. He doesn't need comfort, he snapped. He needs discipline. The moment was so sharp, so unkind, it stunned me. He had a nightmare, I said, trying to keep my voice low. He needed someone. That's not your job, Silas barked. Your job is to follow the damn rules. I stood then, slow and steady, shielding Asher slightly with my body. I wasn't going to cower, not for doing the right thing. I didn't realize compassion was off limits here, I said. Don't get righteous with me, he snapped. You broke protocol, you've been breaking it, you're not the mother of this house. I felt my stomach turn. I never claimed to be, I whispered, but someone has to show them what love looks like. He stared at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, rage, grief. Maybe all three, but he swallowed it. You're fired. 2 words, ice cold, no warning, no second chance, just like that. My throat tightened. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, but instead I nodded once calmly. As you wish. I packed in silence. Every folded shirt was a goodbye I didn't know how to say out loud. My toothbrush went in last. Then the framed sticky note the boys had left for me with crooked handwriting that said, "We like Miss T." It shattered me. I looked around the tiny guest room they'd given me. I had only been there a few weeks, but it had started to feel like a heartbeat. Now it was just a room again. Before I zipped my bag, I pulled a sticky note from my journal and wrote 7 small words. If no one else stays, remember, I would've. I folded it and taped it gently to the boys' door. Then I turned and walked away. MS. Delaney met me at the front door like a bouncer escorting out a drunk. I'll have your final paycheck sent, she said, cool and unaffected. I looked at her, really looked at her. I wondered if she ever tucked anyone into bed, if she'd ever let herself love something so much it scared her. You should check on them, I said. They're not as tough as you think. She didn't answer, just closed the door behind me. Rain hit me in the face as I stepped outside. No umbrella, just the kind of downpour that makes you feel like the sky is trying to cleanse something it can't name. I stood at the end of the driveway waiting for the rideshare that was still 8 minutes away. And that's when I heard something. A tap on the glass above me. I looked up. 2 small faces, 1 window, pale moonlight, Asher and Atlas, watching me leave. Atlas pressed something to the glass, a hand, small, flat, still. Asher's eyes were wide, wet, and shimmering with something that looked like betrayal. And just like that, I started crying. Right there in the rain, not the pretty kind. The ugly, broken sobs that come when you know something precious is slipping away and there's nothing you can do, because they were never mine. But I loved them like they were. Jas picked up on the first ring. Oh God, T, what happened? He fired me, I whispered. What? I told her everything, every word, every glare, every ache. She was quiet at first. Then her voice came softer, steadier. You did the right thing, she said, even if it cost you everything. I got to her place in Queens an hour later. She had the kettle already on, made me sleep on her couch, didn't let me cry alone. People like Silas Harrington, she muttered as she passed me a blanket. They don't know how to lose control without burning the whole house down. I held the blanket tighter, thought of the boys. I wondered if they found the note, if they cried, if they blamed me. That night I stared at the ceiling, thinking about Atlas's little voice, the way Asher had called my name in his sleep, the tiny sticky notes we used to pass under doors. And I knew something deep in my bones. This story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks. That's how long it had been since I walked out of the Harrington estate in the rain with a bag of folded clothes, a broken heart, and a note taped to the boys' door. 14 days of silence. 14 nights of restless sleep and replaying that final moment over and over in my head. I went back to working shifts at the senior center across town, changing bedsheets, handing out meds, comforting a few of the lonelier ones who told the same stories every day like they were fresh. The work was humbling, honest, and emotionally exhausting in a completely different way. By the time I finished wiping down the break room microwave one Thursday afternoon, I had fully convinced myself I'd never hear from the Harringtons again. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated for half a second before answering. "Hello!" There was a pause on the other end. Then I heard it, his voice. "Miss Brooks." "Sela's." I didn't respond right away. Just hearing his voice sent a rush of something sharp through my chest, something between dread and unfinished business. He cleared his throat. "Atlas won't eat," he said. "He's barely taken in any fluids. Asher hasn't spoken since you left." He paused again, like the words were harder to form than he expected. "Ms. Delaney quit. She said she couldn't handle the boys anymore." I waited. Still no apology, no I was wrong. Not even a thank you. But then he added, "They keep asking for you." My throat tightened. I gripped the edge of the counter. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. 5 days, he said. "Why didn't you call sooner?" Another silence, and then finally something different in his voice, not anger, not arrogance, just weariness. "I thought I could fix it," he said softly. "I was wrong. I went back, not for Sela's, for Asher, for Atlas, for the sticky notes, for the bedtime stories, for the little hands that had held mine in the dark. But this time, it was going to be different. I didn't arrive with a suitcase. I arrived with boundaries. The Harrington estate looked the same from the outside, gates tall, hedges trimmed, security camera lights blinking red like eyes that never slept. But something felt different as I stepped through the front door. The silence was heavier. The air was colder. And Sela's, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was in a black sweater, unshaven, his hair messier than I'd ever seen it. He didn't offer a handshake, just stood back as I walked in. "Where are they?" I asked. "In their room, haven't come out all day." I headed straight for the stairs. He followed. Asher was curled up on the floor near the window, a crayon clenched in his fist but no drawings on the paper. Atlas was under the bed, silent. I knelt down. "Atlas, baby, it's me," I whispered. There was a pause. Then a pair of big brown eyes peeked out. "Tea," he said, voice small, broken. I opened my arms, and he flew into them like a dam breaking. Asher looked up, dropped the crayon, and ran into my lap. I held both boys, rocking gently. They didn't cry. They didn't ask questions. They just held on, as if the world made sense again. Later that evening, I found Sela's in the kitchen. He was staring into a cup of untouched coffee. The same marble island that used to feel like a barrier between us now looked like a surrender. I sat down across from him. "If I return," I said, "it's as a caregiver, not a servant." He looked up slowly. I kept going. "I won't be treated like help. I won't be silenced when your sons need softness. And you, Mr. Harrington, need to stop parenting through fear." He looked like he wanted to argue, but then he didn't. Instead, he nodded. And then, in a voice so low I almost missed it, he said, "I don't know how else to do it." That was the most honest thing he'd said to me since the day we met, and for the first time, I didn't see a billionaire. I saw a man drowning in the walls he built around himself, and maybe, just maybe, ready to let someone help tear them down. That night, I stayed in the boys' room again, not because I was afraid they'd cry, but because they asked me to stay. We read 3 books, laughed at silly voices, sang softly. And when they were asleep, I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered a quiet promise into the dark. "I'm not leaving again, not unless you make me." I didn't know Sela's was standing at the door, didn't hear him, didn't feel his eyes on me, but I saw the sticky note on my bedside table the next morning. This time it wasn't unsigned. It read, "Thank you for coming back, Sela's. We started small, spoons instead of silence. One Wednesday, I put on an Aretha Franklin record in the living room and dared the boys to a dance-off. Asher won, mostly because Atlas got the hiccups halfway through and collapsed in a giggling fit. For the first time, their laughter didn't sound like it needed permission. Sela's came in halfway through a Motown mix and froze in the doorway. He looked like he didn't know whether to scold us or call security. But then Asher shouted, "Come on, Daddy," and pulled at his arm. Sela's didn't say a word. He just stepped into the living room, loosened his tie, and tried to sway. Tried was the operative word. The boys laughed so hard, Atlas fell backward into the sofa cushions. And Silas? He let out a quiet laugh too, almost like he forgot how to stop himself. That moment lasted 27 seconds. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, stiffened, and walked out. The laughter didn't follow him. We kept rebuilding anyway. Dinner at the table, even if Silas didn't always join. No more trays left at bedroom doors. No more locked fridges or structured eating windows. I taught the boys how to make peanut butter banana quesadillas. They taught me how to play this card game called Trash that I'm still not convinced they didn't invent on the spot. Some nights we lit a candle before bedtime. Not for any religious reason, just because it made the room feel softer. But despite the changes, something still sat heavy in the corners of the house. The guest suite remained shut, and the third-floor door to the art studio, still locked tight. Dust gathered around the handle like a dare. The boys never mentioned it, until one night I was picking up laundry and found a crumpled drawing under Asher's bed. Stick figures, 4 of them. One labeled me, another Atlas, a taller one that said Daddy, and then the 4th, a woman over her head, a big black X. Underneath, one word Mom. My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't call his name, didn't ask questions. I just sat there on the carpet, legs crossed, holding the drawing in one hand and waited. A few minutes later, Asher poked his head in. I forgot it was there, he said, eyes avoiding mine. I nodded. He came over and sat next to me. Is it okay to miss someone and still be mad at them? He asked, voice small. I looked at him, really looked. And then I said, yeah, baby, it's the most honest way to miss. He blinked at me and then leaned his head against my shoulder. We sat like that for a long time. Long enough for Atlas to wander in, plop on the other side, and ask if he could have a candle tonight. That night after the boys were asleep, I walked to the 3rd floor. The hallway was dim, silent. The locked door stood tall like a secret still guarding itself. I put my hand on the knob. It didn't turn. But the moment I touched it, I heard something behind me. Silas. He was standing in the hallway, arms crossed, face unreadable. I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to open it, I said. He nodded slowly. That's not why I'm here. A long pause, then he asked, did Asher draw something today? I nodded. Did he show you? I found it. Silas exhaled through his nose. He used to draw her with stars around her head. I waited. After she died, he continued, that changed. The stars disappeared, then the colors, then the smiles. Now it's an X, I said gently. He nodded once like the truth had already lived in him for a while. We stood there in silence, both of us staring at the locked door. And then he whispered, more to himself than to me. Maybe it's time we let the house breathe again. But he didn't unlock the studio. Not that night. Not yet. Healing, after all, doesn't happen in one brave moment. Sometimes it takes 100 tiny ones, and we were just getting started. The truth didn't come with thunder. No scandal. No dramatic confrontation. Just a tree, a slip, and a whisper. It was a Saturday, one of those crisp fall afternoons where everything feels quieter under orange leaves. The boys were outside playing. Silas had loosened up just enough to let them climb the old oak tree in the side yard, something I knew made him uneasy, but progress meant letting go. I was folding laundry upstairs when I heard Atlas scream. I flew down the stairs barefoot. Silas was already outside, holding Asher in his arms. Blood trickled from the boy's temple, and there was a sickening angle to his left wrist. Silas's face was ghost white. Get the car, he barked, voice shaking. Now. The ER was quiet except for the beep of monitors and the low shuffle of nurses' shoes. Asher had passed out from the pain. Atlas clung to my leg, his eyes wide and glassy. Silas sat beside me, elbows on knees, hands shaking. When the nurse came in with the intake chart, she looked at Silas. Any medications, allergies, trauma history? Silas opened his mouth. Nothing came out, I answered. No allergies, no current medications. He has mild asthma triggered by smoke and cold air. The nurse blinked, glanced at Silas, then back at me. Are you the mother? I didn't speak, but Silas said without hesitation, yes. I turned to look at him. He didn't even flinch. Later that night, when the boys were home and asleep and the house was lit only by a single lamp in the kitchen, Silas poured 2 glasses of whiskey. I shouldn't have said that, he said quietly. I took the glass but didn't drink. Why did you? He looked down at the glass like it held the answer. Because it felt right and because I panicked. I leaned against the counter, arms folded. You froze again. He nodded. I thought you'd correct me. I wanted to, I admitted, But Atlas was watching. He sat down slowly at the marble island, shoulders sagging. "Can I tell you something?" I didn't answer, just waited. He looked up at me with tired, bloodshot eyes. "The night my wife died," Asher saw it. The room fell silent. He continued. "They told me it was an accident. She slipped in the studio, hit her head, but the boys, they won't talk about it. And there's this part of me that wonders if it was more. If I could have stopped it, if she meant to fall." My breath caught. "You think it was suicide?" He nodded. "And the guilt. It built this place, these walls, the cameras, the rules. I thought if I could control everything, I could protect them." His voice cracked. "But they're still broken, and now you're getting hurt just trying to fix what I buried." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I thought I could do this alone, but I can't." There was a pause, one of those heavy silences that lets pain leak into the room. Then he said, almost a whisper, "I miss her, but I don't know if I ever really forgave her for leaving." I sat down across from him. "You don't have to forgive her tonight," I said. "You just have to stop punishing yourself." His hand shook slightly as he picked up his glass. And then, for the first time since I stepped into that house, Silas Harrington cried. Not the silent, stoic kind of grief men usually offer the world. Real tears, shoulders heaving, mouth trembling. I got up, walked to his side, and did the only thing I knew how to do. I held him, not because he deserved it, not because he asked, but because someone had to. And in that moment, I realized something. He wasn't the villain in their story. He was just another broken character trying to survive the plot. And maybe, just maybe, we were all still writing the ending. We were finally breathing again. The twins were smiling more. Silas had started packing lunches. Believe it or not, even if he did accidentally put Post-its instead of napkins one morning. And me, I'd stopped flinching every time the front gate buzzed. Until that Tuesday, I was folding the boys' laundry when the intercom crackled. "Miss Brooks," MS Delaney's voice was tight. "There are officials at the door from Child Protective Services." My stomach dropped, the kind of drop that makes your hands go numb. Two women in gray suits stood in the entryway. They were polite, smiling even. One held a clipboard, the other had a tablet, but their presence was ice cold. "We received an anonymous report," one of them began. "Allegations of blurred emotional boundaries, failure to maintain a professional environment, potential manipulation of minors." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" They asked to see the boys, their bedrooms, the playroom, my personnel file. Then they asked me to sit. "Have you ever overstepped the boundaries of your employment, Miss Brooks?" "I don't even know what that means," I said. "Do you mean loving the kids I'm paid to care for, feeding them when they refuse to eat, staying up with them when they wake up screaming?" They didn't answer, just wrote notes. Then came the real blow. "We'd like to ask about your background," the second woman said. "Any prior infractions, previous terminations from childcare roles?" I stiffened. "I've never been terminated, and if you're asking whether I've been arrested, no, I haven't." They pressed again, not directly, but it was there, in the way they scanned me like I was a statistic, not a person. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't about the boys, it wasn't about concern for their safety. It was about me. Someone in Silas's world didn't like that a black maid had become the emotional center of his children's lives. Someone had pulled strings, made a call, sent wolves dressed in professionalism to tear apart the one thing we'd finally started to build, family. For the first time, I wanted to run. I thought of packing my bag, disappearing. Maybe it was foolish to believe I could belong here in the first place. But then I heard footsteps, fast, bare feet on the hardwood floor, the twins. Asher ran straight to my side and grabbed my hand. Atlas stepped between me and the women, his little chest puffed out. "She's our person," he said. "You don't get to take her." "Asher and I, we told them stuff," Atlas added, glancing at his brother. "We told them stuff we never told anyone. She never made us. We trust her." The CPS workers exchanged glances. For once, they looked unsure. The interviews ended shortly after. The next day, they closed the case. No evidence of wrongdoing. But something changed in me that afternoon. I wasn't just a caregiver anymore. I was a threat to the people who'd built walls around this family, and I had to decide whether I'd keep climbing those walls or start knocking them down for good. I thought CPS closing the case would be the end of it, but I underestimated just how far people will go to protect a version of the truth that suits them. 2 weeks later, Silas's sister, Margaret Harrington Wells, served him custody papers. I found them on the marble island, half crumpled, next to a half-drunk glass of scotch. Silas didn't say a word, just stared out the window like the sky might offer a better answer than the law ever could. "She says I'm unfit," he muttered. "That I've lost control of my home. She doesn't even know them," I said. "She never visits." Silas looked at me then. "She doesn't need to. She only needs to prove you've blurred the lines." Ah, there it was again, me. The real threat wasn't neglect or harm. It was love. Love that didn't fit their pedigree. Love that had too much melanin and not enough pedigree. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning in a downtown family court. It was everything you think of when you hear the words custody battle. White walls, polished shoes, whispered strategy between lawyers. But what hurt the most was Margot's voice. She is not a professional caregiver. She was hired as a housekeeper, and now she's inserting herself as a maternal figure to vulnerable children. What training does she have? What certifications? She turned to me, eyes cold. "What qualifications does Miss Brooks have other than proximity?" Silas stood up. "She stayed," he said. The whole courtroom went quiet. "She stayed when the boys wouldn't speak, when I was a wreck, when every nanny before her quit in days. She stayed, and they love her." "Of course they love her," Margot snapped. "She's manipulated them." "You weren't there," Silas growled. "You never were." The boys testified via video, sitting together in matching sweaters, nervous but brave. "Do you feel safe in your home?" the judge asked. Atlas nodded. "When Miss T's there, yes." Asher whispered, "She makes the dark go away." The judge asked more questions, trying to stay neutral, but something shifted when Ms. Delaney, who had resigned months ago, walked in holding a letter. "I supervised every staff member in the Harrington household for over 7 years," she told the judge. "And I've never seen anyone earn those boys' trust the way Miss Brooks did, what she gave them. It wasn't strategy, it was love." And then, Atlas did something no lawyer could have planned. He opened his sketchbook. "Can I show the judge?" he asked. The bailiff brought it forward. A crayon drawing. 4 stick figures, Silas, the twins, me wearing the superhero cape they made from the old curtains. Underneath, in wobbly handwriting, "My family." The judge adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat. "In light of the testimony and the emotional health of the children, I see no reason to alter primary custody." Margot exhaled sharply, but the judge wasn't done. "In fact," he said, turning to Silas, "given Miss Brooks's central role in their stability, why hasn't she been granted legal guardianship?" The room froze. Silas looked at me. No script, no prepared speech. Just his eyes, tired, humbled, full of a question he'd never dared to ask. "Would you?" he said. I didn't even hesitate. "I would." I moved into the guest suite the next day, not because I needed a bigger space, but because it finally felt like I wasn't just working in this house. I belonged in it. The room still smelled like expensive linen and forgotten grief. But I opened the windows. I hung a photo of my grandmother. I left the door cracked open at night, just enough for 2 small feet to tiptoe in if nightmares came calling. And they did. But this time I didn't have to hide. The boys started calling me Mama T. At first, it was just Asher, quietly, in the middle of a pancake breakfast. "Can Mama T cut mine into triangles?" Silas nearly choked on his coffee. I waited, afraid of what he'd say, but he just smiled into his mug and said, "Only if she makes mine too." From that moment, the name stuck like honey. Warm, a little messy, but completely ours. Silas and I never had a defining conversation about us. No midnight confessions, no grand gestures. Instead, it was 1,000 small things. He started walking me to the car when I ran errands. He poured 2 glasses of wine instead of 1. He listened, really listened, when I talked about the kids' triggers, their coping routines, the importance of structure and softness. We were building something. Slow, tender, unlabeled, but real. One night, he called me into his study. "I want to do something," he said. "In her name, for other kids." He showed me a binder labeled Harrington Home Project. "I have the capital," he continued, "but I don't have your heart or your vision." We stayed up past midnight, brainstorming, dreaming, sketching programs for children who had survived trauma just like ours. It wasn't about replacing his late wife. It was about honoring what love can become after the storm. Bellevue Prep invited me to speak at their fall symposium. The theme, emotional resilience in caregiving. I almost said no, but Atlas handed me a cape, stitched out of old curtain fabric. Painted letters, superhero made. "You're brave," he said. "Go be brave for the others." So I did. I stood on that stage and told our story. I talked about love that doesn't come with titles, about showing up even when you're not sure you belong, about how staying is the real superpower. I wasn't polished, but I was honest. And afterward, a young woman in the audience came up to me crying. She said, "I'm raising my brother's kids. No one sees me until now." That night back at home, we sat around the dinner table. Pizza boxes, paper plates, laughter louder than the rain tapping at the windows. And then, out of nowhere, Silas stood up, glass in hand. "I have something to say," he said. We all looked up. "We're not just surviving anymore," he said, voice thick with something between pride and gratitude. "We're living." He looked right at me. "And it's because she stayed. It's been 3 years now. The mansion doesn't echo the way it used to. The long hallways that once swallowed sound now carry laughter like it's a permanent guest. The twins, now 8, sleep through the night without nightmares. Their laughter isn't polite or careful. It's wild, loud, belly deep, like it belongs here. Silas, he still burns toast every Sunday. It's become a running joke in our house. But the man who once barked orders like commands now kneels down to braid hair before school, who lets Atlas pick mismatched socks because creativity matters. And me, I still hum gospel hymns while folding laundry. The soft, low ones my grandmother used to sing while shelling peas on the porch. I still leave sticky notes, little reminders like "you are enough," tucked into lunchboxes and notebooks. And yes, I still cry sometimes. Like when I pass the nursery door and see Atlas asleep with his sketchbook resting on his chest, a new family portrait etched in crayon where everyone's holding hands. Some days, I visit Bellevue Prep to speak to new caregivers. They ask me how I did it. How I, a fill-in maid, ended up here. I always smile and say, by staying. Because the truth is, I wasn't their blood. I wasn't supposed to last a week. I was just the help. A temporary fix. The kind of woman stories usually forget. But I stayed. I stayed through tantrums and trauma, through slammed doors and awkward silences. I stayed through gossip and side eyes, through moments when Silas didn't know how to be a father and I didn't know how to be anything but a fighter. And in that staying, we healed. Together, we built something unbreakable, something not written in DNA or dictated by last names but formed in the quiet moments. Late-night giggles under blankets, sticky fingers from too much syrup, heartbeats that finally trusted each other. One night, Silas took my hand while we watched the boys build a fort out of couch cushions. "You know," he whispered, "I used to think love had to look a certain way, polished, proper, predictable. And now," I asked. He looked at me the way people look at miracles they didn't believe in until they happened. "Now I think love looks like this. So, if you're hearing this story, wondering if people like me ever make it to the ending, we do. My name is Tiana Brooks. And this is how I became a mother in the house where no one thought I belonged. And in the end, turns out I was never the maid. I was the glue. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from grand gestures, but from quietly choosing to stay. I didn't walk into that house expecting to become anything more than a temp. I was a maid with a past, a paycheck away from invisible, but I showed up. I listened. I learned. And I loved fully even when it wasn't safe. And somewhere along the way, that house of cold marble and stricter rules became a home. Here's what I've learned, and what I hope stays with you. Family isn't made by blood. It's built in the trenches of healing, trust, and presence. Broken people don't need fixing. They need faith. Someone who sees the good that still lives under all that pain. And love. Real love doesn't need a title. It just shows up, day after day. Through the tantrums, the silence, the toast that burns every morning. We don't always get to choose where life drops us, but we do get to choose how we rise. So now I ask you, have you ever been in a place you didn't think you belonged, but ended up transforming everything just by staying? Have you ever been someone's safe place, even when you were breaking inside? If this story made you pause, reflect, maybe even see your own scars a little differently, leave a comment. I'd love to hear how you stayed when others ran. If you see family in a different way now, share that too. Your voice might be the one that makes someone else feel seen. And if you enjoy stories that speak to the soul, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss what's coming next. Because the next story, it might just be yours.